The Walter Kerr Theatre, formerly the Ritz, was built in 1921 by the Shubert brothers. This Adamesque theater was completed in a record 66 days by architect Herbert J. Krapp.
These Broadway houses, especially the smaller Broadway theaters like the Walter Kerr, are, I think, some of the most perfectly designed proscenium theaters on the planet and are really a national treasure.
I love the Walter Kerr. The theater is always my favorite. If I have a play to produce, my first choice is always the Walter Kerr.
In the 1920s, the theater was home to light comedies and plays starring Claudette Colbert, Helen Hayes, and a young Bette Davis. By the 1940s, it became a radio and television studio. From the mid-60s to the early 80s, it was almost always vacant.
The Kerr, which was then called the Ritz, had never been an operating Broadway theater in my youth. It sort of disappeared off the face of the map. I walked into it for the first time in my life in 1987 and was very disheartened by the way it looked.
Jujamcyn Theaters, then run by Rocco Landesman, bought the Walter Kerr in 1981 and, with the help of designer Roger Morgan, devised a plan to bring audiences back to the theater.
Rocco Landesman said, "We're having trouble getting producers to want to put their play here. What can we do?"
I said to Rocco, what would happen if we put this theater back exactly the way it was on the day it opened in 1921? It would be a good story, it would cost us a lot of money, but it might put the theater back on the map.
I went and looked at it with him, and I said, well, the theater's ugly. That's part of the problem. I said, I can fix that. So we found carbon filament lamps of the same kind that Thomas Edison used and that were the original kinds of light bulbs that people had in that era. And we used them throughout the theater, and it was just a wonderful choice because it made it so mellow and so warm.
It ended up looking exactly the way it did in 1921, spectacularly beautiful. And this was before many of the other Broadway theaters had been restored. That was the first one, and it was an amazing experience to do.
In 1990, Jujamcyn renamed the Ritz after the Pulitzer Prize-winning theater critic Walter Kerr. The renovation helped launch a new era for the theater, attracting some of America's best playwrights and most celebrated plays. This included Tony Kushner's Angels in America, a look at the lives of gay men during the darkest days of the AIDS crisis.
Come on!
What are you doing?
Don't say it! I mean it! Say, Roy Cohn, you are a homosexual. And I will proceed systematically to destroy your reputation and your practice and your career in New York State, Henry. Which you know I can do.
There were moments in the early 90s when the public found places to mourn collectively what we had gone through since 1981 when the virus first appeared. And people need to be able to gather together, and there needs to be an occasion where it makes sense to gather together to share grief. And I think Angels here at the Walter Kerr became one of those places.
And ultimately, the play takes us on a journey of reconciliation to a moment where we understand that we are all part of the same family.
In 2000, Proof, originally produced off-Broadway by the Manhattan Theater Club, came to the Walter Kerr.
What do you do for sex?
What?
At your conferences. Isn't that why people hold conferences? Travel, room service, tax-deductible sex, and big hotel beds.
I wasn't sure if I wanted to move to another theater because the experience was so precious and so perfect, and I didn't know if it would work, moving it into a bigger house. It felt so intimate.
You sit in your seat as an audience member. You look at the walls and the beautiful frescoes. You look at the ceiling. You feel as though you're in a place of beauty. In some way, you feel something wonderful is going to happen here.
The audience is the dreamer, and the play is the dream. It's a very powerful thing, but it's a very indirect force in the world. If you want to play with those forces, they're very real, but they're mysterious. You join hands with the audience and you walk forward into the dark together.
If you're alive and you're trying to give that show to that audience, and they're open to it, and you're lucky and everything's shining on you, you know, something beautiful happens, and sometimes that happens 5 months in on a Wednesday matinee. You never know, you know.